Reed stepped off the metal ramp of his ship as the stale wind of the dead moon rushed past him, carrying with it the scent of burned wiring and shattered alloy. The ruins of the abandoned research station stretched across the rocky plain like the skeleton of some forgotten creature half buried in silence. His mission had been simple: salvage what was left after the solar flare wiped out communications. Collect any valuable tech and get out before the next storm surge fried his systems. But nothing was ever simple anymore. Not since humanity started. Crawling beyond their solar system and meeting things that did not belong in any textbook back on Earth. As Reed moved through the shattered hallway of the station, his boots crunching against broken glass, he noticed the flickering of dim emergency lights, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The walls were scorched, the control panels fried, and most of the living quarters were nothing more than shadows and dust. But then he heard something soft, a breath, maybe a faint whisper carried through the air, that didn't sound like it came from any machine. He raised his torch and followed the sound deeper into the corridor. Behind a twisted door, frame half collapsed from an explosion, he found her. Curled against the wall, her pale limbs trembling, her silver hair stained with blood that shimmered unnaturally in the light. She looked almost human, but not quite. Her eyes were too large, her skin too smooth, and her body too fragile. She looked at him with fear as he stepped closer and tried to speak in his calmest voice. He said he was not going to hurt her, he only came to check for survivors. But the girl looked panicked, her voice raspy, as she tried to move away from him, whispering words in a language he did not understand. Reed activated the universal translator patch on his collar, hoping it would catch some of her words, and after a few seconds, it began to sync. She kept repeating the same phrase over and over again. Do not touch it, do not drink it. Not the blood, not the blood. Her voice trembled as if she were protecting something sacred, as if even the mention of it made her afraid. Reed stepped back slowly, not wanting to scare her further, and then opened his medkit, offering her water and a stabilizer injection. She shook her head, pushing his hand away, and instead clutched her side, where the blood was flowing freely. It was thick and bright, and pulsed with an unnatural glow, like it was alive. He radioed his team on the ship above, but the solar flare had knocked out long-range comms. He was alone with her. No help was coming soon. The alien girl, whose name he didn't know, was bleeding out, and all he could do was keep her alive until the storm cleared. Hours passed slowly. Reed built a small shelter using metal panels and emergency sealant to shield them from the temperature drop. He gave her some food from his rations, which she nibbled without speaking. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, her gaze fixed on him with suspicion. He asked her name, and after a pause, she told him softly it was Laura. The translator made it sound simple, but he suspected the real name carried more meaning. When he asked what happened to the others at the station, she only said they were taken, and then looked away. Later that night, she started shivering badly, her body rejecting the human medicines he gave her. Her blood had soaked the cloth around her waist, and it glowed brighter now with every beat of her heart. Reed panicked, unsure of what to do. There were no medics, no advanced tech, and no way to transport her while the storm raged. She grabbed his wrist suddenly and pulled him close, her voice hoarse and pleading. If you value your soul, she said, do not drink it. No matter what happens, even if I die, you must never drink it. Her eyes were full of something deeper than fear, something ancient, something sacred. Reed nodded and promised, though he did not understand. He had seen alien customs before, had read the warnings, had heard about rituals and taboos that humans could not comprehend. He thought this was one of them, some cultural rule tied to their biology. He didn't want to offend her, he wanted to help, but his hands were tied. He sat beside her in silence, listening to the wind howl against the broken metal and watching the blood glow brighter as the night grew colder. She fell asleep eventually, her breathing soft but uneven, and Reed sat awake, guarding her, hoping she would make it to morning. In the silence, his mind began to wander to the old stories. He had heard from explorers on fringe colonies stories of alien blood that could heal, that could bond, that could transform those who dared to taste it. He always thought they were myths passed around for drama or warnings made bigger with time. But now the temptation stood before him in real bleeding form, and the fear in her voice. When she begged him not to drink, it made him wonder what power it truly held. His body ached from the radiation exposure from the long mission and the failing ship. He felt weak and lightheaded, his vision blurring slightly. The cold was getting to him. He looked at her again, her face pale, her breaths slow, her glow fading. The vial of her blood collected from earlier sat in the medkit, sealed and pulsing with faint light. He reached for it once, then pulled back, shaking his head, trying to push the thought away. She had trusted him, had pleaded with him, and he gave his word. But the pain in his chest grew sharper and the cold in his bones deeper, and somewhere in his mind a whisper echoed, not in her voice, but in something else. Something ancient that called to him not with words, but with a feeling. He closed his eyes, but sleep would not come. The wind howled louder now, the storm outside building, the silence inside pressing against his thoughts. The vial lay still in the kit, glowing faintly like a heart that refused to stop beating. And in that darkness between thought and desperation, the first crack of temptation began to form. The night passed slowly as the cold bit deeper into the walls of the ruined station, and the silence grew heavier around. Reed, who sat awake, eyes fixed on the glow of the strange vial inside the medkit. His thoughts restless, his body aching from radiation, burns that pulsed beneath his skin like hot wires twisting through his blood. He kept glancing toward Laura, who lay unconscious, her breath shallow, her skin pale like frost-covered stone, her glowing blood seeping through the makeshift bandages in slow, rhythmic pulses that seemed to match the throb of the silence itself. His hand hovered over the medkit again, fingers twitching slightly as if drawn by some invisible pull, not of logic but of instinct, something ancient buried deep inside the human mind that whispered, when all else failed, survive at any cost. He looked at her again and remembered her voice, sharp and trembling, when she had begged him not to drink it, when she had looked at him like she feared not only for herself but for him too. But now she was silent, and the station was dead, and the pain in his ribs felt like something breaking slowly from the inside. His vision blurred again, and the heat behind his eyes made the walls of the room tilt slightly with each breath he took. He tried to fight the thought, he tried to focus on the mission, on the rules, on the promise he made, but his hands kept shaking, and his heart kept pounding louder and louder, as if trying to outrun the weakness spreading through him like poison. When he opened the medkit again, the glow from the vial spilled across his skin, soft and warm and alive. It pulsed like something breathing, like it knew he was watching, like it waited for him, and in that moment, all the warnings, all the logic, all the fear faded behind the one need that rose like a wave in his chest, the need to live. He didn't remember lifting the vial, only the warmth as it touched his lips and the strange, metallic taste that rushed over his tongue, thick and cold, and then suddenly burning hot as if fire had entered his chest and spread through his veins like lightning. He dropped the vial, gasping as his back hit the floor, and a scream tore from his throat. Without sound, his vision flooded with images, not his own stars. He had never seen faces, he didn't know places, he had never walked, all flashing like fragments of memory crashing into him all at once. He saw a city built from living stone high in the clouds of a planet with 2 suns. He saw creatures flying with wings made of light. He saw battlefields soaked in glowing blue blood, and heard cries in languages that did not belong to humans. Somehow he understood them, every word, every name, every pain etched into the blood now running through his body. He curled on the floor, trembling, his body on fire, his thoughts breaking apart into pieces before slowly stitching themselves together, again, like someone had taken everything he was and rewired it from the inside. When he finally opened his eyes, the room looked clearer, the shadows sharper, the air filled with sounds he hadn't noticed before, like distant echoes of thoughts not his own. He sat up slowly, his body no longer aching, his hands steady, his mind quiet. But beneath that quiet was something else, something not human, pulsing gently like a second heartbeat. Laura stirred from her corner, her eyes blinking slowly as if waking from a dream, and when she looked at him, her face twisted into something between horror and grief. She tried to speak, but her voice broke and she crawled backward, pressing herself against the wall, as if distance could undo what had already happened. "You drank it," she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief, her eyes wide and wet. "You really drank it?" Reed didn't answer, not right away, because he didn't know what to say. The truth sat heavy in his chest, and he could feel it changing him with every second that passed. She stood on shaky legs and reached for a tool from the floor, holding it between them like a weapon, though her hands trembled so much it was clear she wouldn't be able to use it even if she wanted to. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she said, not angry but broken, "not just to me, but to yourself, to your people, to everything you know." He tried to explain that he was dying, that he had no choice, that he thought it was the only way, but the words sounded hollow even to him, and the look in her eyes made it worse. Not hatred, not rage, but sorrow so deep it felt like the silence had cracked open. "You don't understand," she said again, and this time her voice was softer, quieter, like she was speaking not just to him but to herself. "You didn't just take blood, you took memory, you took connection. You took a bond meant only for one. You didn't just heal, you merged." Reed stared at her, trying to understand, trying to make sense of the feelings inside him, the voices, the visions, the strange calm that had settled in his bones like something ancient watching from within. She sat down slowly, her strength failing again, and for a long time they said nothing, just listened to the wind outside, and the hum of the broken station, and the sound of two people who now shared something neither of them asked for. Eventually she told him that her people were not like humans. Their blood carried more than life. It carried history and thought and feeling, passed down through generations, and that once joined it, could never be separated. She told him that no human had ever taken it before, because none had ever been trusted enough to be given that choice, and that now the bond between them would grow whether they wanted it or not. Reed listened without speaking, and though part of him still felt guilt, still felt shame, still felt regret, another part was beginning to understand not just what he had done, but what he had become. Not something new, something dangerous, something that could never go back. And as he looked at her, pale and silent and glowing faintly in the darkness, he realized that nothing about the mission, nothing about the galaxy, nothing about himself would ever be the same again. Reed sat in the dim light of the station's broken walls, feeling the weight of silence pressing down on him, as if the air itself was aware of the shift inside him. The warmth from the alien blood had faded, but something remained beneath his skin, a quiet thrum like a second pulse, not loud, not violent, but steady and undeniable. His thoughts moved faster, his senses sharper, every small sound in the station now clear to him like whispers carried through air that no longer felt cold. He could hear the flicker of electricity deep within the broken circuits, the soft heartbeat of Laura as she lay against the wall, her breathing shallow and uneven. He looked at her face not with pity, but with a growing sense of connection, something he didn't understand, but could not ignore. She no longer held the tool in her hand, her strength nearly gone, and her eyes now searched his not with fear but confusion, like she was looking at someone she thought she knew but no longer recognized. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form the words he felt something shift, not outside, but deep within his mind, a flicker like static, a rush of color that wasn't from his eyes. Images came, not his own, yet familiar memories, not rooted in earth, but in places he had never seen, faces he had never touched. But somehow he remembered the feeling of walking on soft ground that glowed beneath the feet, the rush of flight, not with machines but with living wings, the grief of losing a brother in a war that ended before his own birth. He fell back, clutching his head, the pressure growing, as voices filled his mind, whispering names and songs in languages he had never spoken, yet understood, as if his brain now wore an echo of someone else's soul layered over his own. Laura moved toward him, slowly dragging her weak limbs, and when she reached him, she placed her hand over his forehead and closed her eyes. Not speaking, just feeling, just listening, and when she opened her eyes again, there were tears on her cheeks, not from pain, but from something deeper. She whispered that the bond had begun to root, that he was feeling what she had inherited from those before her, that he was now carrying memories of her kind, and if it continued, he would become something between both, something that had never existed before. Reed sat up, breathing hard, trying to understand how something as simple as survival had led to this. How one choice could change not just his body, but his mind and the way he saw the world. He reached for the medkit to check the rest of his equipment. But as his hand brushed the metal, he felt another wave of memory strike him, a flash of battle, a scream, a burning city, not his, not Earth. Yet he felt the loss like it had always been inside him. Laura watched him and said that when their blood was shared, the soul did not separate from the body. It traveled, it left traces, pieces that lived on in others, and now her ancestors walked inside him as shadows beneath his thoughts. He looked at his hands and wondered who he was becoming, wondered if the man who had once flown ships for salvage and searched broken worlds for scrap still existed, or if that version had faded into memory, now replaced by something more, something alien. The silence between them grew heavy again, not with fear, but with questions that neither of them could answer yet. Both felt growing stronger with every passing hour. Then, without warning, a sound cracked through the stillness, sharp and mechanical. The outer sensors of the station, registering motion, someone or something had entered the perimeter. Reed stood quickly, his body reacting faster than his thoughts, and he rushed to the console, dragging power through cracked wires and half-dead panels until the screen flickered to life, showing shapes moving across the dust, a group of figures, dark and armed, approaching without hesitation. Laura's face turned pale as she saw the screen and whispered one word: hunters. She explained that these were not her people, but a faction that had once hunted her kind across systems, seeking their blood, not for bonding, not for memory, but for power, artificial strength drawn from the stolen life of others. They were pirates, mercenaries, creatures without origin, who thrived on the blood of others, and now they were here, drawn by the trace of her presence, or perhaps the echo now inside Reed himself. Reed felt something rise in his chest, not fear, not yet, but something older, a readiness, a calling that did not belong to his training or experience, something that came from the blood, now running in his veins. His hands moved to the weapons pack, setting up the last of the station's defense protocols, activating the turrets, repositioning the shielding, even as his body moved on its own, guided by instinct that did not belong to him. He looked to Laura and told her she needed to stay hidden, that he would handle it, and though she looked afraid, she did not argue. Instead, she placed her hand on his chest one last time and whispered a word in her language, something he could not repeat but somehow understood. It meant remember. As the outer wall shook with the impact of enemy fire and red lights began flashing through the corridor, Reed stood alone near the broken entry hatch, his breath steady, his mind no longer just his own, his body stronger, faster. Not fully human, not fully alien, but something rising between. And as the first shadow moved through the door, he no longer hesitated. He was ready. The station groaned under the pressure of weapons fire as dust fell from the cracked ceiling and small lights flickered in warning, while Reed crouched near the main corridor, his eyes fixed on the rusted entry gate as shadows crept across the door, thick, heavy shapes, too quiet, too smooth, and far too calm to be human. His breathing was slow, his body strangely still, and though he could feel the adrenaline rising in his chest, his thoughts were not racing. They were focused, narrowed into something sharp like a blade, ready to be drawn. The memories in his head, not his own, moved like wind between ancient trees, whispering tactics and instincts that belonged to warriors of Laura's bloodline, those who had fought and fallen long before Earth even knew their kind existed, and now those ghosts moved through him, not with fear but with purpose. The hatch burst open with a hiss of escaping pressure, and the first of them stepped inside a tall figure clad in layered armor that shimmered like black glass with eyes that glowed red from behind a smooth mask. No voice, no words, only the soft, mechanical hum of movement as more entered behind the first 4, 6, then 8, all of them moving with unnatural precision. Reed didn't wait. He moved like water, his hands gripping the pulse rifle left behind by the research team weeks ago, and his body twisted low across the floor as the first shots ripped through the hallway, beams of searing heat that struck walls and cut through metal like paper. He slid into cover behind a crate and returned fire, but his aim was different now, too smooth, too accurate. Each shot fired with perfect timing, as if guided by something deeper than training. He heard one of them fall, then another, the sharp sound of armor cracking, followed by the soft collapse of weight. And still he moved without stopping, never thinking, just reacting, just flowing through every second with clarity he had never known before. One of the hunters got close, too close, and swung. A blade curved and glowing with red light, but Reed ducked under the strike, stepped inside the attack, and drove the butt of the rifle into the creature's chest, knocking it backward, then followed with a kick that sent it crashing into the wall. He took its blade and moved forward faster, now silent, deadly, his face calm, his eyes sharp. Through it all he could feel Laura, not just behind him hiding, but within him, connected still and watching through their bond. She could feel every moment, every move, and though she was weak, her spirit rose through him like a voice pushing him forward, not in command, but in trust. The hunters began to retreat, regrouping deeper into the station, moving to circle and trap him. But he was faster, already predicting their movements, already sensing their intentions before they acted. And as he moved deeper into the corridors past broken labs and shattered glass, the battle changed from defense to hunt. They had come for her blood, for the secret locked inside her veins. But now they faced something new, something they could not understand, a human with alien memory, a soldier born not of war, but of choice and desperation. He caught 2 more. In the generator room, their weapons raised, but too slow. His blade moved like light, cutting clean through armor, and silence followed again as the echo of their fall faded into the broken station halls. But it was not over. One remained, the leader, taller, stronger, different from the others, his armor more advanced, his weapon heavier and glowing with energy, not standard tech, but something twisted, something stolen, something that hummed like a living thing. Reed stepped into the main control room, where the last of the power still hummed in broken circuits, and across the platform stood the leader, alone, waiting, not speaking, just watching with tilted head and slow, steady breath. They circled each other, the hum of the machines rising around them, sparks falling from the ceiling, and then without warning the hunter attacked fast, strong, his weapon striking with waves of force that shook the walls and lit the room with flashes of red. Reed blocked the first strike, barely, the force sending him skidding across the floor, but he rose again, and this time he didn't just fight with hands, he fought with memory, with movements passed down from 1,000 battles, voices in his head guiding his arms, pushing his legs, showing him how to move, how to strike, where to land the blow. The battle raged not for minutes, but for what felt like hours, neither giving ground, until finally Reed caught the opening he needed, spinning low beneath a heavy strike and driving the blade up into the soft joint beneath the hunter's chest plate. The creature froze, the weapon clattered to the ground, and Reed stepped back, breathing hard, as the hunter collapsed into silence. When it was over, he didn't celebrate, he didn't shout, he simply stood still, surrounded by the aftermath of the storm. As the dust settled and the lights flickered in quiet surrender, he turned and found Laura standing in the hallway, her legs barely holding her up, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something else, something deeper, a mix of sorrow and awe. She stepped forward and looked at him, her voice quiet as she asked how he had done it, and he said nothing, just met her gaze, and in that silent connection, she knew the truth. The blood had not just healed him, it had changed him, made him more than human, more than her people, something between, something born from an accident that was no accident at all. She said the bond had grown stronger, and now it could not be broken, not by time, not by death, and not even by distance, and he nodded slowly, not because he agreed, but because he felt it too. Every part of his mind and body now linked with hers, every memory, every thought now echoing with pieces of a past that belonged to both of them. And in that quiet space between them, with the enemy gone and the world still broken, they both understood what had truly begun, not just survival but transformation. Station had fallen into a deep silence after the battle. Only the distant hum of damaged machinery still stirred, as if the place itself breathed with what remained broken and alive in equal measure. Reed stood beneath the flickering ceiling lights, watching Laura as she walked slowly through the corridor, her bare feet leaving no sound behind her, her body frail, but her presence strong. Something about her no longer felt like weakness, even though she still carried the same wounds. Her eyes were focused and distant, her steps unsteady, yet full of meaning. They returned to the small shelter he had built days ago, a space filled with makeshift gear, half-working devices, and blood-stained cloth. But now it felt different. It wasn't just a place to wait anymore. It had become something else, a space between what was and what had to be. Reed sat near the cracked panel beside the medkit, the empty vial still resting inside. It no longer glowing, but still holding the memory of the moment that changed everything. He could feel the connection inside him, now stronger with every breath. Not just a bond, not just memory, but life itself moving through him with purpose. Laura sat across from him, her back against the cold wall, her gaze lowered as if the weight of what she had to say rested too heavy on her chest. She told him slowly that her kind had ancient rituals, meant only for those chosen through centuries of knowledge and consent, rituals that merged minds and blood, not out of desperation, but devotion, something sacred, not meant to be forced, not meant to be broken by accident or pain. What happened between them was never supposed to be, yet it had come to pass, and now they stood at a point where it could no longer be undone. Reed listened without interrupting, the memories inside him shifting like echoes. He could feel her thoughts brushing against his, not words, but emotions, moments of her past, her training, her childhood, her loss, her isolation. He knew now that she had not just feared him, she had feared what it would mean to be seen, to be known too deeply without choosing it for herself. But now things had changed. Reached into the pouch near her belt and took out a crystal, small and blue, flickering softly like a drop of living sky, and placed it between them. She said this was what remained of her ancestors, a living piece of history, passed only during a true merge, a ritual that finalized the bond and allowed the memories to settle within both minds, not as chaos, but harmony. She told him she could end it. Now she could use the crystal to pull back her essence, leave him free, remove the bond at great cost to herself. But he would return to being human, whole, and untouched by alien memory. Or they could complete the merge together, willingly, as equals, not out of need or mistake, but through shared choice. And if they did, they would become something new, neither her nor him, but a bridge between two paths that had never crossed before. Reed stared at the crystal, the blue glow reflecting in his eyes, and for a long time he said nothing, his mind filled with thoughts of Earth, of his crew, of the man he had been, before he found her, before he broke the rule, before he made a choice that could not be reversed. He thought of his loneliness, the empty missions, the stars that never felt like home. He thought of how her memories felt like belonging, how her voice inside him felt like purpose. He looked up and met her eyes, not as a human to alien, but as one being to another, caught in the same truth. And he spoke clearly, simply saying that he would not undo what had already become part of him. He told her he would not run from the connection, just because it scared him, because now he saw it not as a curse, but as something rare, something alive. Laura did not smile, but there was a soft change in her face, a kind of calm acceptance, like a storm that finally settles after tearing through the sky. She placed her hand on the crystal and he placed his hand over hers, and together they held it as the glow brightened and a wave of warmth spread through them. was not pain, it was not fire or heat or light. It was memory flowing like water through every cell of their bodies, reshaping not their forms but their understanding. They saw through each other without speaking. They walked through childhoods that did not belong to them, yet felt real. They shared laughter, pain, wonder, grief, every breath of two lives becoming one. When it was done, the glow faded, and the crystal turned gray, empty, no longer needed. Reed felt no more confusion, no more burning. He felt whole. He looked at Laura and saw not just her but a part of himself, and when she looked at him, he knew she no longer feared being known. The station still stood around them, broken quiet, but the storm outside had passed, and the skies beyond the metal walls were clearing. Satellites slowly began to reconnect, and the signal from Earth finally pushed through. The static, the rescue ship would arrive soon, but Reed knew he would not return as the same man, nor would he go back alone. Galaxy would not understand, not yet, maybe never, but something had begun here on a ruined moon station, far from any map. Something built from blood, pain, fear, and finally choice. They stood side by side as the sun rose, beyond the shattered windows, casting light over dust and silence, and the bodies of those who had come to steal, had tried to take power without understanding. It had destroyed them. Reed had taken the same power by mistake. But what saved him was not the blood itself, it was what he chose to do after. He chose to listen, he chose to trust, he chose to stay. And in doing so, he became part of something that might one day change everything, not through war, but through connection. The end.